Welcome, the Lord's chosen. When a chosen one moves, the world doesn't clap, it glitches. That's exactly what's happening right now. Nobody can explain you, nobody can predict you, and honestly, half the people watching you are still trying to figure out whether you just manifested something or accidentally broke the algorithm of their reality. Because let's be honest, you didn't just do something unusual. You did something unexplainable, the kind of shift that makes people lower their voice, replay events in their head and whisper, "Abeg, what exactly did this person tap into?" And here's a fact to anchor this madness. Studies show that when people can't logically understand someone's behavior, their brain fills in the gaps with imagination. And imagination is always more dramatic than reality. That's why they're talking. That's why they're analyzing. That's why your name is trending in circles you've never entered. But the truth is deeper than gossip. What you just did wasn't an action. It was a ripple. The kind of ripple that disturbs the comfortable, awakens the sleepy, confuses the prideful, and exposes the pretenders. One decision, one shift, one elevation, and suddenly everyone is acting like they just witnessed a spiritual plot twist. You didn't announce anything, you didn't perform miracles. You didn't stand on a table and shout, "Look at me." No, you simply lived in alignment, and somehow that was enough to send people into philosophical paralysis. Some are inspired, some are intimidated, some are pretending not to care, but checking your page more often than you do. And a few are secretly praying you don't level up again because they're still recovering from the last upgrade. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly why everybody's whispering, why nobody can explain you, and why the atmosphere seems confused every time you enter it. And yes, there will be honesty, depth, revelation, and maybe a sprinkle of humor so you don't pass out from all the intensity. Let's get into it. Number 1, you shifted the atmosphere without opening your mouth. There's a reason people reacted differently the moment you walked in, and it wasn't because of what you wore or how loud you were. Something about your presence rearranged the room before you even said a word. You didn't demand attention, but attention adjusted itself around you. People who were laughing too loud suddenly toned it down. Those who were bragging felt their confidence turn shaky. Even the ones who think nothing phases them became strangely alert, as if an invisible spotlight had just switched on. This kind of effect isn't showy, and it's not something you can manufacture. It's the kind of shift that comes from someone who carries clarity, purpose, and a level of inner alignment that unsettles people who aren't used to facing themselves. Your presence held a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for anyone hiding behind personality, performance, or pride. You didn't expose them intentionally. You simply existed, and their facade couldn't survive the pressure of authenticity. Some people felt drawn to you because they sensed stability in you, something calm, grounded, almost soothing. Others felt irritated or nervous because your energy highlighted everything they'd been avoiding. They couldn't explain why, but suddenly their words felt too heavy, their jokes felt forced, and their usual confidence felt borrowed. They weren't responding to you. They were reacting to the truth you carry. It's the same reason people remember your entrance even when you swear you didn't do anything special. To you, it was just another moment. To them, it was a shift in the atmosphere, the kind that makes their instincts wake up and pay attention. They don't know if you're a threat, a blessing, or a challenge to the environment. They just know something different walked in. You didn't come to impress or dominate. You simply came as yourself. And somehow that was enough to reset the tone of the entire room. That's the power people can feel, but can't describe. The influence that works without noise, the presence that doesn't need approval to leave an impact. That's why they're talking. They felt something real, and realness always leaves a mark. Number 2, you triggered transformations people didn't ask for. You didn't set out to change anyone, but something about the way you move through life forces people to confront the parts of themselves they've been avoiding for years. It's not because you preach, correct, or try to fix them. You simply show up as someone who's willing to grow, and that alone exposes how much they've been standing still. People who have been comfortable in their patterns suddenly feel uncomfortable, not because you judged them, but because your evolution highlighted their stagnation. Some people don't realize how much they've settled until someone like you enters their space. They start noticing the habits they've outgrown, the relationships that drain them, the excuses that keep circling around in their minds. You didn't tell them to change. Your presence made change feel necessary. It's almost like you carried an unspoken standard, and standing next to you showed them everything they'd been avoiding. For some, this awakening feels inspiring. You spark their ambition, remind them of dreams they buried, and push them to want more out of life. Suddenly, they're making decisions they should have made years ago, setting boundaries, taking risks, speaking up, leveling up. They may not give you credit, but deep down, they know your influence nudged them awake. For others, your impact feels uncomfortable. They feel exposed, triggered, or defensive because you disrupted the version of themselves they were trying so hard to maintain. You didn't attack them, but your growth made their excuses shrink. Your confidence made their insecurities louder. Your clarity made their confusion harder to hide. And instead of admitting that you inspired them, some respond by pulling back, talking behind your back, or acting like you did something wrong. But the truth remains. You changed their perspective without trying. You opened doors in their mind they weren't ready to walk through yet. You brought out sides of them they weren't prepared to meet. And even if they never say it, they know you were the catalyst. Not because you spoke, but because you lived in a way that made transformation unavoidable for everyone around you. Number 3, you disrupted their hierarchy without challenging anyone. You didn't compete, confront, or demand attention, yet the moment you arrived, everything shifted. People who thought they were untouchable suddenly felt exposed, and those who were quietly following felt a pull toward you they couldn't explain. Your presence alone unsettled the carefully constructed dynamics around you. Leaders questioned their authority without realizing why. Influencers found their influence slipping. And those who were content in the background suddenly felt the urge to step up or step away. You didn't push anyone down, but the balance of power they relied on stopped functioning the way it always had. The strange part is that you didn't intend to. You weren't trying to prove anything or show anyone their place. You simply lived in alignment with yourself, acted from your clarity, and allowed your instincts to guide your interactions. And that was enough to disrupt the artificial order that people depended on. The ones at the top felt a subtle threat they couldn't articulate. The ones at the bottom felt hope they didn't expect. No one knew whether to admire, fear, or mimic you, because your energy existed outside the usual rules of hierarchy. People noticed changes in subtle ways. Conversations paused when you entered. Decisions were reconsidered without anyone voicing it. The environment itself seemed to rearrange around your presence. And yet, you didn't claim authority, give orders, or demand loyalty. You simply existed as someone who operates on a different wavelength, and the ripple effect made everyone around you react, adjust, and question their own positions. This is why they can't explain you. The disruption isn't visible in a single act. It's in the cumulative effect of your alignment, your confidence, and your refusal to play by their invisible rules. You didn't dethrone anyone. You didn't start a war. You didn't even announce your presence. You just moved in a way that exposed the cracks, shifted the balance, and left the entire room recalibrating itself around the energy you brought. And that, more than anything, terrifies people and fascinates them at the same time. Number 4, you brought a level of authenticity. Their masks couldn't survive. There's something disarming about someone who shows up as their real self in a world full of performances, and that's exactly what you did. You came into spaces with no script, no agenda, and no need to impress. That alone was enough to make people who rely on personas feel strangely exposed. They're used to winning people over with controlled expressions, practiced confidence, and predictable behavior. But around you, all of that starts to malfunction. Their charm doesn't land. Their intimidation doesn't work. Their usual tricks don't get the reaction they expect. It's almost like your authenticity interrupts the signal that their personas depend on. You didn't call them out. You didn't attack who they pretend to be. But your presence silently reminded them of who they really are. And for some people, that's uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the gap between their image and their truth. People who hide behind bravado suddenly feel small. Those who use humor to deflect start stumbling over their jokes. Even the ones who pride themselves on being mysterious feel strangely transparent. They sense that you see them beyond the surface, and that alone makes their rehearsed self crumble a little. What makes this even more interesting is that you're not trying to expose anyone. You're not on a mission to humble people or make them face themselves. You're just being honest in a way that society rarely rewards. You speak plainly. You listen sincerely. You show emotions without apology. You set boundaries without performing toughness. And somehow, this simplicity feels like a spotlight to people who have spent years layering themselves in personas. Some people respond by becoming more real around you. They relax, open up, and drop the act because your presence makes honesty feel safe. Others feel threatened because authenticity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is something they've avoided their entire life. So they act awkward, defensive, or irritated without understanding why. But the truth is simple. Artificial things don't survive in the presence of someone who isn't pretending. You didn't strip their mask off. Their mask simply couldn't hold its shape when faced with someone who doesn't need one. That's why they talk about you. That's why they can't forget you. Your realness isn't loud, but it's powerful enough to make the fake unravel. Number 5. You made people feel seen in a way they didn't know was possible. There's a difference between looking at someone and actually seeing them, and you've always operated on the deeper level. You don't skim the surface of people. You pick up on the tone behind their words, the truth behind their behavior, the shift in their energy when something doesn't match. You don't pry, you don't interrogate, but your awareness cuts through layers most people aren't used to being noticed under. And for those who pride themselves on being unreadable, that feels like exposure. It's unsettling because people get comfortable hiding in plain sight. They're used to presenting the version of themselves they think is safest, confident, tough, unbothered, mysterious. But around you, that version starts to feel transparent. You respond to the intention instead of the performance. You catch the emotion beneath the silence. You notice the hesitation in something they insisted was fine. It's not something you do consciously, it's just who you are. Your perception works on a deeper frequency, and people feel it. Some people appreciate this because it's rare to meet someone who sees you without judgment or agenda. They relax around you in ways they don't around anyone else. They open up without knowing why. They trust you with truths they didn't plan to share. Being seen by you feels like relief, like finally dropping a weight they didn't realize they were carrying. But for others, being seen feels like a threat, especially those who've built an identity around being unreadable or untouchable. They're not used to someone catching the cracks in the armor they've worn for years, so they call it mystery, weird energy, or strong presence. Because admitting that you saw the part they hide would mean acknowledging a vulnerability they're not ready to face. And the irony, you're not trying to decode anyone, you're simply tuned in. Your intuition doesn't wait for permission. Your empathy doesn't need explanation. People feel analyzed by you when all you're doing is listening with more than your ears. This is why they talk about you long after you leave. Being seen is rare. Being understood without speaking is rarer. But being perceived so clearly that someone's mask slips without effort, that's unforgettable. And that's the effect you carry. Number 6, you walked away from what others would beg for. This is the moment that truly confused people, because you did something that doesn't make sense in the world they live in. You walked away from things most people chase with everything they have: attention, approval, invitations, connections, opportunities, and environments that look good on the surface but felt wrong to your spirit. And the part that shook them wasn't just that you left, it was how effortlessly you did it. No drama, no long explanation, no begging for understanding. You simply chose yourself, and that decision rattled people who rely on external validation to feel complete. They couldn't wrap their minds around someone who doesn't cling, doesn't settle, and doesn't negotiate their identity just to belong. When they saw you release things they would have fought for, it exposed how much they depend on those things for security. You weren't impressed by titles that flatter the insecure. You weren't tempted by relationships that drain your peace. You weren't seduced by opportunities that contradicted your growth. You walked away because you value alignment more than aesthetics and purpose more than popularity. People assumed you must have lost something until they saw you glow after leaving. They thought you were being dramatic, until your elevation proved otherwise. They believed you'd return out of fear or loneliness, but you never did. That's what made them uncomfortable. You didn't just leave a situation. You left a way of thinking they're still trapped in. Your refusal to be bought or borrowed made people respect you even when they didn't want to, because walking away from the wrong thing is harder than holding on to it. It requires clarity, discipline, and a level of self-worth most people are still searching for. Your strength in letting go made their own compromises feel heavy. Your decisions highlighted the areas where they've chosen comfort over growth. And even now, people discuss it because they're still trying to understand how you had the courage to leave what they would have chased. They don't realize you didn't walk away from something. You walked toward yourself. And that kind of move always turns heads, whether they admit it or not. Number 7, you broke patterns that were generational, not personal. What you did didn't just shift your life. It shook the foundation of everything that came before you. People can feel it even if they can't explain it. There's a certain weight you carry, not because you're burdened, but because you're the one who finally said, "This stops with me." You ended cycles your family normalized, habits they repeated without questioning, and mindsets they passed down because they didn't know any better. You didn't just make a different choice. You broke a pattern that had been winning for decades. This is why your growth confuses people. They can tell your breakthrough isn't the usual glow-up or lucky moment. It has a depth to it, a kind of spiritual rebellion that feels bigger than your story alone. You walked into territory the generations before you never reached. You healed wounds they ignored. You challenged beliefs they obeyed. You rejected limitations they accepted. That's not personal change, that's ancestral work. People talk about you because the shift is obvious. You think differently, move differently, choose differently. It shows in the way you refuse chaos, the boundaries you set, the peace you protect, and the future you're building. They see someone who broke out of a mold that everyone else stayed trapped in. And deep down, they know that didn't happen by accident. It takes a certain kind of strength to face problems you didn't create. It takes courage to heal pain you didn't cause. and it takes a rare kind of clarity to walk away from dysfunction, even when it's familiar. Your victory makes people whisper because it doesn't feel normal. It feels historic. It feels like something shifted not just in your life, but in the entire bloodline. The old patterns couldn't survive your mindset. The old habits couldn't manipulate your spirit. And the old fears couldn't guide your decisions. You didn't just break a pattern. You broke a curse disguised as tradition. You freed yourself, and in doing that, you freed the ones who come after you. That's why your elevation feels like a phenomenon. You're doing what generations before you couldn't even imagine, and everyone can feel the ripple. Number 8, you made the impossible look like a Tuesday. People are still trying to understand how you pulled off something they've been stressing about for months, years, or maybe their whole life. Meanwhile, you handled it so calmly that they're convinced you have access to some hidden power they weren't born with. The truth is, you didn't rush, brag, or announce anything. You simply did what needed to be done without turning it into a performance, and that's exactly why it shook them. Most people treat progress like a grand event. You treat it like daily maintenance. What they label impossible is often a combination of their fears, procrastination, and limiting beliefs. But you don't approach challenges from that angle. You move with an inner certainty that makes difficult things feel manageable. You don't dramatize your goals or overthink your steps. You trust yourself enough to act while others are still gathering courage to think. That confidence makes your actions look bigger than they felt to you. It's not that the task was easy. It's that you're aligned with who you are. So effort doesn't drain you the way it drains someone who's pretending or forcing themselves. You don't fight your instincts. You follow them. And when you follow who you truly are, what looks supernatural to others becomes your normal pace. People expected you to struggle, panic, or hesitate. Instead, you stayed steady, focused, and silent. You didn't document the process or seek applause. You just handled it and moved on. That type of quiet execution confuses anyone who relies on noise to prove their progress. It convinces them something mystical happened because they can't comprehend that consistency and clarity can produce results without chaos. Your success exposed the difference between effort fueled by anxiety and effort fueled by purpose. They thought you magically skipped steps, but you simply didn't fear them. They thought you got lucky, but you were prepared. They thought you had help, but you had discipline. And while they're still processing the outcome, you've already shifted to the next thing. Because for you, doing the impossible isn't a miracle. It's a rhythm. It's your natural mode when you stop apologizing for your potential and just step into it. That's why they can't explain you. You mastered what they complicate, and you made it look like just another Tuesday. Number 9, you woke up. Parts of people. They didn't know they had. There's something about you that pulls buried things to the surface, things people thought they outgrew, outlived, or simply failed at. You don't motivate with speeches or pressure. Your presence alone acts like a reminder of everything they once wanted to become. Old dreams they pushed aside suddenly feel possible again. Confidence they lost starts creeping back. The version of themselves they abandoned begins knocking on the door. And it all happens simply because they're around you. You carry an energy that disrupts stagnation. People who settled start questioning why they stopped trying. People who shrank themselves start realizing how much space they deserve. People who gave up on life quietly begin feeling a spark they haven't felt in years. You don't even notice this happening, but they do. They feel the shift internally, sometimes so strongly it scares them. It's like being around you activates something they forgot was still alive. For some, that activation feels like inspiration. They start leveling up without anyone needing to push them. They pick up projects, heal old wounds, reach for goals they once labeled too late. They see your growth and suddenly remember they wanted more for themselves too. You become a living reminder that change is possible. But for others, this awakening becomes irritation, not because you did anything wrong, but because being around someone who reminds them of their unused potential feels threatening. It highlights how long they've been asleep. It exposes how much they've allowed fear or laziness to dictate their choices. Instead of being grateful for the spark, they feel defensive. They start comparing, competing, even resenting you, just to avoid acknowledging that you awakened a part of them they weren't ready to face. Either way, nobody leaves unchanged. You don't let people stay numb. You don't let them stay comfortable in denial. You bring life back into their ambition, their creativity, their bravery, their sense of purpose. Even those who pretend not to care feel the shift. You carry a presence that wakes up the inner self, the part that knows they're capable of more. And whether they welcome it or fight it, the truth remains. You activated something in them they thought was gone forever. Number 10, you exposed the limits of envy. There's a certain point where envy stops working, and you're the one who revealed exactly where that line is. People tried everything, copying your style, mimicking your tone, adopting your habits, even studying your moves like a blueprint. But no matter how closely they replicated the surface, they couldn't recreate the substance. They could match the actions, but they couldn't match the energy behind them. And that's when the truth hit. Your value was never in the things you did. It was in the person you are. Envy thrives on the belief that someone's success is based on a formula anyone can steal. But you shattered that illusion. You proved that authenticity can't be duplicated, alignment can't be imitated, and purpose can't be counterfeited. People who thought they could outdo you found themselves frustrated because every time they tried to one-up you, you effortlessly shifted into another lane. You weren't competing. You were evolving, and they couldn't keep up because their motivation wasn't growth. It was comparison. What irritated them most wasn't your success. It was how naturally your success came from being yourself. They tried to force what flowed for you. They tried to manufacture what you carried effortlessly. And the harder they tried, the more obvious the gap became. They weren't chasing your achievements. They were chasing your essence, and essence isn't for sale. Some people became silent watchers, secretly studying you like a case they couldn't crack. Others became loud critics, because attacking what they can't imitate feels safer than admitting defeat. But behind all their reactions was the same realization. You are not understandable through logic, strategy, or copying. You are experiential. You are lived. You are something they have to be, not something they can steal. And that's why they talk. Not because they've figured you out, but because failing to figure you out bruises their ego. Envy exposed its own limits when it met someone whose identity can't be duplicated. You made it clear. You're not a template. They're chasing a soul print, and that's impossible to replicate. Number 11, you moved like you were guided, not guessing. People watched the way you made decisions and couldn't understand how someone could walk with so much certainty in a world where everyone else hesitates. While they were collecting opinions, running to friends for validation, or waiting for the perfect moment, you were already moving. And from the outside, your choices looked bold, risky, even reckless. But what they didn't realize was that you weren't guessing your way forward. You were following an inner clarity they've never experienced. You didn't move from fear or pressure. You moved from alignment. You trusted your instincts even when they didn't make logical sense to others. You said yes without needing applause and said no without needing permission. That level of calm conviction confused people who need the crowd to feel safe. They couldn't grasp how you made major life shifts without overthinking, how you walked away from the familiar without regretting it, or how you stepped into new territory without trembling. Your intuition wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a performance. It was that quiet certainty that comes from knowing yourself deeply, your patterns, your triggers, your limits, your potential, your purpose. You weren't reacting to life. You were listening to it. And when you listened, things lined up in ways others could only call luck or timing, because they couldn't accept that intuition, when aligned, becomes its own type of intelligence. People tried to warn you, slow you down, or convince you to take the safer route. But while they relied on external reassurance, you relied on internal direction. That difference alone created results they couldn't match. You weren't always right, but you were always in tune. And that's why your path kept unfolding even when theirs felt stuck. Your movements annoyed some people because your confidence exposed their hesitation. It reminded them how much time they've wasted waiting for signs you didn't need. But it also inspired others, the ones who saw your choices not as recklessness, but as trust in something deeper. You moved like someone guided, not guessing, and people could feel that. They may not understand it, but they can't deny that alignment hits differently, and you're the proof. Number 12, you survived moments that should have broken you in half. People watched the storms you faced and assumed you would collapse under the weight. They counted the blows, calculated the losses, and silently prepared to see you falter. But you didn't just survive. You came back stronger, sharper, and more unshakable than before. What they call resilience is only a word to them, but for you, it's a way of life. Every setback became a lesson, every disappointment a fuel for growth. They thought they understood pressure, struggle, and adversity, but you redefined all of it simply by standing back up when everyone expected you to fall. It wasn't luck or timing that carried you through. It was your refusal to allow circumstances to dictate your story. While others wallowed in frustration or begged for pity, you quietly analyzed, adapted, and rebuilt. You didn't just patch the cracks, you strengthened the foundation. Your recovery wasn't visible in grand gestures. It was in the way you moved forward with purpose, in the calm confidence you radiated, and in the energy that screamed, "I'm still here and I'm unstoppable." What shocks people most is how naturally you handle what would break most. They assume that hitting rock bottom requires struggle and visible suffering, but you've proven that strength can be silent, sharp, and seamless. The same eyes that counted your failures now watch your rise in disbelief. They expected fatigue, doubt, and hesitation, but you showed them something far more terrifying: mastery over yourself, even in chaos. Your resilience is instructional because it exposes the gap between those who survive and those who thrive. Most people bounce back. You bounce forward. You don't just recover, you evolve. And that evolution makes your story unforgettable. They talk about you because they witnessed something rare, a person who not only endured what should have ended them, but emerged with a force that cannot be ignored. You didn't just survive. You transformed survival into a blueprint for power, proving that breaking points are only as final as you allow them to be. Number 13, you didn't ask to be respected. You became someone they couldn't disrespect. Respect isn't something you demanded, negotiated, or bargained for. You didn't need validation to set the standard for how people should treat you. Instead, you lived in a way that made disrespect impossible without exposing the person trying it. Your presence, your calm, your clarity, and your self-awareness created an invisible line that people instinctively recognized, but couldn't cross without looking foolish. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about energy, boundaries, and consistency that refused compromise. People quickly realized that playing games with you backfires. They can't manipulate you with lies, guilt, or charm. They can't force your compliance, trigger your anger, or bend you into submission. The moment someone attempts it, their own flaws and insecurities are revealed. They become the spectacle while you remain composed. That's why people end up embarrassed trying to test your limits. You don't give them leverage, they only expose themselves. Your aura isn't flashy, it isn't loud, it isn't a performance meant to scare anyone. It's quiet strength. It's the kind of presence that communicates, without words, that you know your worth and won't settle for less. People feel it immediately, and it changes how they interact with you. Even those who normally challenge authority, push boundaries, or dominate situations instinctively recognize that you are untouchable, not because you're above anyone, but because your foundation is solid. Over time, people learn that trying to disrespect you is not worth it. They may test the waters, but your consistency and integrity shut it down every time. You didn't create a reputation, you created a standard, and anyone who crosses it only highlights their own weakness, not yours. You became someone they couldn't disrespect because you mastered yourself first. You didn't ask for honor, you embodied it. And that quiet mastery leaves a lasting impression, one that others can neither undermine nor ignore. You aren't just respected. You're untouchable in ways people don't even fully understand. Number 14. You proved you don't need a stage to become the topic. You never shouted, broadcasted, or forced anyone to notice you. You didn't chase likes, clout, or recognition. You didn't perform for validation, and yet somehow you became the center of everyone's conversation. People talk about you not because you demanded attention, but because your energy, your presence, and your actions make ignoring you impossible. You exist in a way that naturally draws focus, and that alone terrifies and fascinates those around you. While others hustle for visibility, you operate quietly, steadily, and deliberately. You build, create, and evolve without the spotlight, and the results speak louder than any announcement ever could. That's why people can't explain you. They can't reduce you to trends, social media posts, or achievements, because you're not performative. You're unavoidable. Your influence doesn't need hype. It seeps into every space you enter, leaving a trace that lingers long after you're gone. People analyze your every move because they are trying to decode something that isn't meant to be decoded. You're not following anyone else's script, and that freedom is foreign to them. You didn't climb on a stage to be seen. Your alignment made you visible without effort. You didn't seek acknowledgement. Acknowledgement sought you. You didn't market yourself. You became the benchmark. And that's the difference between someone who goes viral and someone who becomes unforgettable. Viral fades, attention shifts, trends die. But being unavoidable is permanent. It doesn't depend on performance, luck, or timing. It depends on integrity, presence, and the unwillingness to shrink. People obsess because they sense your weight in a world built on noise. They talk because they can't contain what they witnessed. They analyze because they don't understand it. You didn't create a spectacle. You created a standard, a quiet force that cannot be ignored. And that's why, without even trying, you became the topic, the benchmark, the phenomenon they can't stop discussing. Everything you've just seen, read, and felt is a testament to a truth most people will never fully grasp. Being chosen isn't about being loud, flashy, or desperate for validation. It's about living in a way that aligns so deeply with who you are that the world has no choice but to take notice. You don't have to announce your power, flaunt your victories, or force attention. You simply exist, and that existence shifts everything around you. Every room, every conversation, every energy you touch recalibrates because the chosen carry an influence that is unavoidable, undeniable, and unforgettable. You have the rare ability to trigger growth in others, awaken forgotten courage, and challenge systems, both personal and generational, without ever intending to. You've walked through storms that should have broken you, and yet you've returned sharper, stronger, and calmer. You've exposed the limits of envy, the futility of imitation, and the fragility of false confidence. People talk about you because they feel your impact even when they don't understand it. You've proven that real power doesn't need a stage, that authenticity destroys facades, and that alignment carries a force no persuasion can replicate. Being chosen isn't about being understood. It's about being felt. It's about moving in a way that commands respect without demanding it, making impossible things look effortless, and living in a clarity that awakens everyone around you. Those who encounter you are left with ripples they cannot ignore. They are inspired, unsettled, awakened, and challenged, all at once. You are the mirror they never asked for, the standard they can't reach, and the force they can't contain. That is what it means to be chosen. That is what it means to move in a presence that nobody can explain, but everyone notices. If this resonated with you, make sure to join the movement. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss these truths. Hit the like button to show your support. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and share this video with anyone who needs to feel seen, awakened, and empowered. The world is talking, and it's time you let them feel the impact of being truly aligned, authentic, and unstoppable. Stay blessed always.